The vibration in Daniel Carter's pocket was subtle, almost polite, yet it shattered the illusion of control he had carefully built around himself. The boardroom was silent, all eyes fixed on him, waiting for a decision worth millions. Charts glowed on the screen, numbers rising and falling like a familiar language he once trusted. But Daniel didn't speak. His hand froze around his phone as a single word flashed across the screen. Home. He told himself to ignore it. He always did. Work was easier than memory. Work didn't ask questions or look at him with eyes full of loss. Still, something inside him cracked. Against every rule he had set for himself, Daniel lowered his gaze and opened the app. The image loaded slowly. His kitchen appeared, quiet and ordinary, until his heart nearly stopped. His son Leo was on the floor. Not in his chair. Not tucked safely where Daniel believed he always was. Just there, small, fragile, surrounded by pots and wooden spoons. For a terrifying second, panic surged through Daniel's chest. Then he heard it. Laughter. Not the soft, forced sound therapists tried to coax out of Leo. This was real, bright, unrestrained, alive. Leo's hands moved with purpose as he tapped rhythms only he understood, his face glowing with joy Daniel hadn't seen in months. Daniel's vision blurred. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard that sound without pain following close behind. Then the camera caught another movement. The new maid, quiet, unremarkable, barely noticeable when Daniel interviewed her, was lying on the floor at Leo's level. She wasn't correcting him. She wasn't rushing him. She wasn't looking at him with sadness. She was celebrating him. Every tap earned a cheer. Every smile was met with applause, as if Leo were the most important person in the world. Daniel felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. This wasn't part of the plan. The cameras were meant to protect, to control, to keep distance while he stayed safe behind glass and schedules. Yet here he was, watching a stranger step into a space he had abandoned. In that moment, Daniel realized the cameras hadn't revealed danger. They had revealed his absence. Daniel didn't remember standing up, only the sudden scrape of his chair against the polished floor and the startled faces around the table. Someone called his name, asking for clarification, for approval, for leadership. None of it reached him. His world had narrowed to a single thought, pulsing louder than any alarm he had ever installed. He needed to be home. The drive felt unreal, the city blurring past as memories pressed in from every side. He hadn't always been this distant man chasing silence through work. Once he rushed home early just to hear Leo's bedtime stories. Once the house smelled of dinner and laughter instead of echoing emptiness. That version of life felt like it belonged to someone else now. The accident had changed everything. Not just Leo's body but Daniel's courage. Grief had taught him how to function, not how to feel. He built walls where doors once stood and convinced himself that protection meant watching from afar. The cameras were proof of that belief. They allowed him to see without being seen, to care without risking the pain of being present. As he pulled into the driveway, Daniel hesitated. For months, he had mastered the art of arriving late, after Leo was asleep, after the house had settled into quiet. Going inside while life was happening felt terrifying. What if Leo looked at him with disappointment? What if he didn't look at him at all? The front door opened to sounds he hadn't heard in a long time. Music played softly. Not therapy music. Something playful, uneven, full of rhythm. Daniel stood still, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. From the hallway he saw them again, Leo and the maid sitting side by side now. She wasn't guiding his hands or telling him what to do. She was letting him lead. Leo noticed him first. Their eyes met. Daniel braced himself for confusion, for fear, for the familiar distance. Instead, Leo smiled and lifted a spoon like a trophy as if saying, "Look what I can do." That single gesture struck Daniel harder than any boardroom failure ever could. In trying to shield his son from harm, he had almost shielded himself out of his son's life. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Daniel wondered if protection without presence was no protection at all. The maid noticed Daniel only after Leo's excitement spilled over into clumsy laughter. She looked up, startled, and rose quickly, brushing her hands against her uniform as if she'd done something wrong. Daniel raised a hand, stopping her before she could speak. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous. If he spoke too soon, the fragile moment might disappear. He watched instead. He watched the way Leo leaned toward her without hesitation. The way his shoulders relaxed, his eyes bright and curious rather than guarded. Daniel had paid specialists and experts who promised progress measured in charts and timelines, yet none of them had unlocked this simple joy. This woman had done it without instructions, without expectation. Later, when Leo grew tired and drifted into a peaceful sleep, Daniel finally asked the question that had been circling his thoughts. "How did you do that?" His voice was calm, but his hands trembled slightly. She smiled, not proudly but gently. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just listened to him." Those words lingered long after she left the room. Listen. Daniel realized how rarely he had done that. He had listened to doctors, to advisors, to his own fear, but not to his son. He had been so focused on what Leo had lost that he missed what Leo still had. That night, Daniel didn't open the camera app. For the first time since installing the system, he left his phone untouched. Instead, he sat beside Leo's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, memorizing the soft sounds of sleep. Guilt washed over him, but so did something else, resolve. The next morning, Daniel made a choice that startled everyone, including himself. He cleared his schedule. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. He stayed home. Not as an observer, not as a watcher through screens, but as a father learning how to show up again. And in that quiet decision, something shifted. Daniel didn't know yet how to fix the past or what the future would demand of him. But he knew one thing for certain. Healing, he was beginning to understand, didn't always start with movement. Sometimes it started with attention. The days that followed felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling, as if Daniel had stepped into a life he once owned but no longer recognized. Mornings were no longer rushed exits before sunrise. He learned Leo's rhythms, the quiet moments when his son needed space and the sudden bursts of energy that appeared without warning. Daniel found himself sitting on the floor more often than on the sofa, discovering that comfort didn't always come from soft cushions, but from being at the same level. At first, Daniel didn't know what to say. Silence had been his armor for so long that conversation felt clumsy. Yet Leo didn't need speeches. He needed presence. A hand nearby. Eyes that stayed. Daniel noticed how differently his son responded when he was truly seen. Leo tried more. Laughed more. Even failed more freely without shrinking back in fear. The maid continued her work quietly, never drawing attention to herself. Daniel observed how she turned everyday moments into invitations rather than instructions. A spoon became a drumstick. A towel became a cape. A simple task became a game. There was no pressure, no expectation of progress. And somehow, that freedom made all the difference. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the living room windows, Leo struggled to lift himself during an exercise. Daniel instinctively stepped forward, ready to help, ready to take control. He stopped himself. He remembered what he had learned. Instead of lifting Leo, he encouraged him. Not with urgency but with belief. Leo tried again. His effort was small, almost invisible to anyone else, but Daniel saw it. And when Leo succeeded, even just a little, his pride filled the room. In that moment, Daniel understood something that reshaped him. Strength wasn't about preventing struggle. It was about standing close enough that struggle didn't feel lonely. The cameras still existed, quietly blinking in corners. But Daniel no longer checked them. They had served their purpose. Not by revealing danger, but by revealing a truth he could no longer ignore. Real safety wasn't built from surveillance. It was built from trust, patience, and love given without conditions. One evening, long after the house had settled into stillness, Daniel finally returned to the room he once avoided the most. His study felt colder than he remembered, the screens dark, the chair untouched. On impulse, he powered up the security system, not out of fear this time, but out of curiosity. The recordings played back ordinary moments. Meals, quiet play, shared laughter. Nothing alarming. Nothing urgent. And yet, Daniel felt an unexpected heaviness settle over him. He saw himself in those recordings, passing briefly through rooms like a visitor instead of a constant. He noticed the way Leo's eyes followed him when he used to rush by, how hope flickered and then dimmed when Daniel didn't stop. The realization stung more than any criticism ever could. The cameras hadn't protected Leo from harm. They had protected Daniel from guilt, until now. Daniel made another decision that night. One more difficult than installing any system or signing any contract. He called the security company the next morning and requested the cameras be removed from the living spaces. Not all at once. Slowly. Deliberately. Each removed lens felt like an admission but also a release. He didn't want to watch his life anymore. He wanted to live it. With the cameras gone, Daniel found himself paying closer attention. He listened more. He waited. He learned how to celebrate small victories that once felt insignificant. A lifted finger. A longer sit. A smile that lasted just a few seconds more. These moments didn't appear on graphs or reports, but they carried more weight than any success he had ever achieved. The maid noticed the change before Daniel did. "He feels it," she said one afternoon, nodding toward Leo. "When you're really here, he feels it." Daniel didn't respond right away. His throat tightened, but his heart felt steady. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was choosing to be part of the process. And that choice, quiet and unseen by the world, began to transform everything. The transformation didn't arrive with a dramatic moment or a sudden miracle. It unfolded quietly in ways Daniel almost missed at first. Leo began to wait for him in the mornings, not by the door but with expectation in his eyes. Daniel noticed how his son's attention sharpened when he entered a room, how his body leaned forward as if saying, "Stay." And Daniel did. One afternoon during a simple exercise, Leo surprised everyone. His movement was small, imperfect, but intentional. The room went still. Daniel held his breath, afraid that reacting too strongly might break the moment. Leo looked up, searching his face not for approval but for reassurance. Daniel smiled, not the proud, loud smile he used to give at award ceremonies, but a quiet one filled with belief. Leo smiled back wider than ever. Later that day, Daniel sat alone, thinking about everything he had built in his life. Companies, wealth, security. None of it compared to what he was building now: trust. The kind that couldn't be bought or monitored. The kind that grew only when someone chose courage over comfort. Before the maid left that evening, Daniel thanked her. Not with money, not with praise meant to ease his conscience, but with honesty. "You gave my son something I forgot how to give," he said. She shook her head gently. "He already had it," she replied. "He just needed someone to notice." That night, Daniel lay awake, not haunted by memories, but guided by a new understanding. Protection wasn't about watching every move. Love wasn't about preventing pain. It was about walking through uncertainty together. The cameras were gone. The fear was loosening its grip. And in the quiet of that house, something stronger than loss had finally taken root. Hope. The change became visible not in dramatic scenes, but in the way the house breathed again. Mornings carried sound, cups clinking, soft music, Leo's laughter weaving through the rooms like light. Daniel learned to slow his steps, to let moments finish before rushing ahead. He discovered that time, when given freely, returned more than it took. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Leo grew frustrated during a simple task. His hands trembled, his focus slipped, and for a moment the old fear flickered across his face. Daniel felt the familiar urge to intervene, to fix, to rescue. He paused. He knelt. He waited. When Leo tried again, it wasn't strength that carried him forward, it was trust. And when he succeeded, even just a little, the pride that filled his eyes was brighter than any triumph Daniel had ever known. That evening, Daniel packed away the last reminder of the old system. No screens. No recordings. Just a photo he placed on his desk. Leo smiling, spoons in hand, joy unfiltered. It reminded him of the day everything changed, not because of technology, but because someone chose kindness without instruction. Daniel returned to work eventually, but differently. He left earlier. He came home present. He stopped measuring success by distance traveled and started measuring it by moments shared. The world still demanded his attention, but it no longer owned him.